Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take the sources you send us, dive in, and pull out those key insights so you can get up to speed fast without feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. And today we've got a really fascinating source. It's excerpts from Ibn Arabi's The Meccan Revelations.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission really is to explore some of his core ideas about, well, reality, spirituality, the whole big picture as he presents it.
Yeah, this looks like really rich stuff. It touches on, God, scripture, metaphysics. There are definitely going to be some surprising connections, maybe a few aha moments for you, the learner.
That's the hope. Some of these ideas might seem complex at first glance, but we're going to try and unpack them in a way that makes sense, that respects your time, and hopefully gives you something memorable to think about.
Okay, sounds good. So let's start at the beginning. Who exactly was Ibn Arabi, and why are these revelations still relevant?
Well, Ibn Arabi was a hugely influential thinker, a mystic, a philosopher back in the 12th and 13th centuries. His main goal was to uncover the inner spiritual meanings hidden within earlier religious traditions.
Particularly the Quran and Hadith.
Primarily, yes. And what's kind of amusing is that during his lifetime, which was a pretty turbulent period, Mongols, Crusaders, he wasn't actually that widely known.
Really?
Yeah, his books, which were incredibly numerous, only existed in like a handful of copies.
So not exactly trending on medieval Twitter.
Definitely not. And the text we're looking at makes an interesting point about approaching his work.
Oh yeah, what's that?
It suggests it's less about adopting a rigid set of beliefs and more about using what he calls working assumptions, sort of orientations.
Okay.
The idea is to see if you can find connections between his symbolism, his language, and your own, inner spiritual life.
So it's more of an active engagement.
Exactly. The text stresses that your own singular aptitude and concentrated intention, your focus, your readiness, are crucial. It actually compares engaging with his work to engaging with the Quran itself in that sense.
Interesting. Okay, that's a helpful frame.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of the core ideas. The term Muhammadan comes up early on. What does he mean by that? It's clearly more than just referring to the Prophet Muhammad.
Absolutely. For Ibn Arabi, Muhammadan signifies something much bigger. Think spiritually universal, or maybe spiritually all-inclusive.
So like a universal spiritual principle.
Kind of, yeah. It's like the underlying essence or blueprint of all prophecy, all spiritual realization, not just one historical figure, but the complete universal reality they point to.
Got it. And that relates to another term the text highlights, shar. He says he preferred this over the more common term, sharia. What's the difference he's making there?
That's a subtle but important distinction. Sharia usually refers to the specific revealed laws, the path, but Ibn Arabi uses shar to point to the universal ongoing process of divine inspiration and unveiling itself.
Ah, okay.
It's like shar is the source, the spring of divine guidance that nourishes all the paths. The Sharia, it's more dynamic, the very core of individual spiritual life, and the origin of the revealed religions themselves.
That makes sense. Okay, moving to creation. The text says the world came into existence by means of God from a reality. Well, a reality we can't know if we try to separate it from its forms using logic alone. That's quite a statement about existence.
And it really is. It suggests you can't just logically deduce some abstract, formless source completely separate from the world we experience.
Right.
The knowing comes through engaging with the form, seeing the divine in the manifestation, not by trying to get behind it purely intellectually.
So knowledge is tied to experience, to the forms themselves.
In a fundamental way, yes. Then we get into God's names and theophanies, these divine manifestations.
Yeah, the text talks about the glories of the face being veiled by the names, and that famous saying about 70,000 veils of light and darkness.
Exactly. It evokes this sense of an almost unbearably intense divine reality. The glories of the face are linked to God's very essence, so powerful that the names act as veils.
And if the veils were lifted?
The implication in that saying is that creation itself couldn't withstand the direct intensity. It would be, incinerated, dissolved by that pure light.
Wow. The text also distinguishes between names that are lights, denoting ontological things, and names that signify incomparability, which are darkness. What's the significance of that light-darkness distinction?
It points to the paradox of the divine. Some names reveal God through his creation, his actions, those are the lights, but other names point to his absolute transcendence, his difference from everything we know, that's the darkness of incomprehensibility, his utter uniqueness.
So you need both aspects for any kind of understanding.
Precisely. Both the manifestation and the hiddenness are part of how the divine is understood in his system.
Okay. Another big concept. The perfect man, al-insan al-kamil. The text puts humanity in a pretty high position, saying only angels are above us, and that there even are students in learning the names.
It does highlight humanity's unique potential, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is that the human being, in potential, can encompass all the divine names and qualities in a way other creatures can't.
Even angels.
Even angels, according to this view, who might excel in specific qualities but don't have that same comprehensive potential. But the text is careful to clarify it's about the plane of existence being more perfect, more encompassing, not necessarily that humans are automatically better than angels.
Right, it's about capacity.
Exactly. Capacity.
Then there's this idea of continuous creation, renewed creation at every single breath through the breath of the All-Merciful. That feels very immediate.
It's a profoundly dynamic view. Creation isn't something that happened once long ago. It's happening now, constantly, sustained by this divine breath. The universe depends on God moment by moment. It's a beautiful and maybe slightly dizzying concept.
It really is.
Yeah.
And a link to that, the text says, being wujud is God himself in a hawk. And all the different things we see are just marks or properties of these underlying immutable realities.
Yes, that's getting into the core of his metaphysics. Ultimately, there's only one reality, which is God's being. The diversity of the world, all the forms and phenomena are like reflections or expressions of the inherent possibilities within that one reality, these immutable entities or essences.
So the separation we perceive isn't the ultimate truth.
From this perspective, no. The ultimate truth is unity, watat al-wujud, the oneness of being.
Okay, and one more core concept here. The world of imagination, alam al-khayal, described as beautiful, perfect, a mirror where God shows similitudes.
This is a crucial realm for Ibn Arabi. It's not just fantasy, it's a real ontological level, an intermediary world between the purely spiritual and the physical.
Like a bridge?
Exactly. It's where meanings take form, where spiritual realities can be perceived symbolically through visions. It's incredibly important for prophecy and spiritual insight. But the text also says only God has full knowledge of it, highlighting its mysterious nature.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift focus slightly to knowledge itself and spiritual realization. The text really hammers home the importance of tahqiq.
Yes, tahqiq. Realization, verification, making something real and true for oneself.
And it contrasts this with knowledge taken, quote, like a dead person from another dead person.
Right. He's drawing a sharp line between secondhand, purely intellectual knowledge, and knowing that comes directly from the source, from the living one who never dies.
Through what? How do you get that direct knowing?
He emphasizes him a concentrated spiritual will, intention, aspiration, often cultivated in spiritual retreat, focusing heart and mind entirely on God. This kind of focus, he says, can open up forms of knowing hidden from, say, theologians relying only on reason.
So it's an experiential path.
Deeply experiential. And there's another interesting point about knowledge, or marifa.
Yeah.
The text suggests that our knowledge in this world can actually be more complete in a certain way, precisely because we experience opposites.
Oh, so?
Because humans contain contradictions. We can be faithful and doubting, feel bliss and anguish, sometimes almost at the same time. This capacity to hold opposites gives us a knowledge of different states that, say, an angel who might only experience perpetual bliss wouldn't have.
So our complexity is actually an advantage for knowing.
In this view, yes, it provides a broader experiential basis for understanding the range of divine manifestation.
And this ties into the distinction made between the vision of Saints al-Kash, the people of unveiling, and the knowledge of the ulama al-rusum, those focused on outward forms.
Exactly. The saints, through inspiration and this direct tasting, talk, grasp the inner realities, the language of states, firsthand. Others might talk about those states based on texts, but it's a different kind of knowing. One is experiential, the other theoretical.
Okay, now let's talk about servanthood, ubudiyya, and sainthood, walaya. The basic meaning of servant abawadid is given as lowly. Right, emphasizing humility, dependence, neediness before God. That's the foundation.
But then it talks about abandoning servanthood, tark al-ubudiyya, which sounds strange. How does that work? It says this happens when you see that possible things remain in their original state of non-existence.
Okay, yeah, this is one of those subtle, potentially paradoxical points. Abandoning servanthood here doesn't mean becoming arrogant or independent. It means realizing the ultimate truth about creation.
Which is?
That contingent things, everything other than God, don't have existence in themselves. Their existence is acquired or borrowed, al-wujud al-mustafad, entirely dependent on God's being.
So in their essence, they remain non-existent relative to God's absolute being.
Exactly. Realizing this deep truth is the abandoning, you abandon the illusion of independent existence. You see that there's truly no existent but God, la mawjuda illa Allah.
I think I'm following. It's a shift in perspective about reality itself.
It is. But then it introduces pure and utter servitude. This seems like the other side of the coin.
Right, where one is, quote, enslaved by phenomena, but gains knowledge of the wisdom within them. How does that fit?
This is about fully embracing your place within the manifested world. After realizing that ultimate dependence, you see the divine wisdom in everything, every event, every constraint, like the earth being trodden on by everyone, good or bad, without complaint.
Ah, so it's acceptance and seeing the divine hand, even in the mundane or difficult?
Precisely. It's living out that understanding of dependence within the theater of the world. The abandonment is the metaphysical insight. The pure servitude is the realized state of living in accordance with that insight.
And the ones who embody this are the friends of God, the awliya Allah,
Yes, they are the ones who possess this kind of comprehensive understanding, who live in that state of awareness.
leading to that profound idea mentioned, that everyone's gaze is always on God, but most are veiled by his sheer clarity.
It's a stunning image, isn't it? That God is too present, too obvious in a way, and that becomes a veil for those who aren't looking with the eye of spiritual insight. The Aliyah are those whose vision has penetrated that veil to some degree.
Wow. Okay. Let's shift gears to eschatology, the end time stuff. Ibn Arabi apparently has a very detailed, metaphysically grounded view.
Yes, he builds on earlier Sufi interpretations, but really dives into the metaphysical meaning of resurrection, judgment, paradise, hell, going beyond just moral lessons to explore the ontological realities involved.
It mentions a lesser resurrection and a greater resurrection. What's the difference?
The lesser resurrection can refer to physical death, the transition from this life. But it can also mean a spiritual death and rebirth within this life, awakening to higher realities. The greater resurrection is the big one, the universal raising and gathering at the end of time.
And there's that analogy about spirits returning to the universal spirit, like water in jars pouring back into the river.
That's a classic Sufi image he uses. It illustrates the idea that individual souls, while distinct in their earthly journey, ultimately originate from and return to the one divine source, the universal spirit.
The text brings up two interesting hadith. One says, when someone dies, his resurrection has already begun, implying
What? Implying that the process of facing ultimate realities, of seeing things unveiled, begins immediately upon death. For the people of vision, those with insight, it might even begin before physical death.
But then there's the other saying, no one sees God until he dies. That sounds contradictory.
It does on the surface, but Ibn Arabi might interpret the first as referring to the beginning of the unveiling process, seeing aspects of the Lord, perhaps reflecting one's own state. The second could refer to the full, unobscured, ultimate vision of God that is only possible after leaving this world of veils entirely. Different stages, different degrees of vision.
Okay, that makes sense. Degrees of perception. What about how God communicates divine address?
The text outlines three main ways according to the tradition. God speaking directly, like to Moses, God speaking through an angelic intermediary, like Gabriel to the prophets, or the message coming through a human messenger.
And the key thing is,
The key is that for it to count as divine speech, the recipient has to know with certainty, through their own spiritual station and insight, that it is from God, regardless of the channel.
got it. The source matters, but so does the receiver state.
Absolutely.
All right, nearly there. The Mahdi, the guided one, at the end of time. Ibn Arabi discusses him too.
He does. He emphasizes the Mahdi's isma, his divine protection from error. He sees him as someone who perfectly follows the Prophet Muhammad's path, but is also directly guided by an unseen angel.
The text gets quite specific, mentioning non-Arab helpers who only speak Arabic and a non-Arab guardian.
Yes, these are details drawn from hadith literature that Ibn Arabi incorporates. They highlight the unique circumstances and divine support surrounding the Mahdi.
And it says God informs the Mahdi about events before they happen, down to individuals.
That's part of the understanding of his divinely granted knowledge and role. He's portrayed as having foreknowledge to guide his actions and even intercede with God to lessen predicted afflictions.
Okay, so wrapping up the core ideas, the text stresses Ibn Arabi's unique way of reading scripture.
Very much so. He's always looking for the deeper, spiritual, metaphysical, and often eschatological meaning within the Quran and Hadith. He sticks strictly to those sources, avoiding later legends.
And it contrasts the saints' inspired understanding, that tasting, with more rational approaches again.
Yes, that theme runs throughout the primacy of direct, divinely inspired knowing, Doc Cash, over purely intellectual deduction.
And finally, it mentions the vision of God being related to one's beliefs in this life. And the power of imagination is that key intermediary world.
Right, the idea that how you conceive of God now shapes how you perceive him later. And the imagination is central to this whole process of how the unseen becomes seen, how meanings take form.
Okay, wow, that was a lot, but hopefully clarifying. So for you, the learner, listening in, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into Ibn Arabi?
I think it's seeing just how interconnected everything is. In his view, metaphysics, spirituality, how you read scripture, how you understand yourself and God, it's a very holistic vision.
Yeah, it definitely offers a different lens for looking at reality, a very profound one. It connects the dots in unexpected ways.
And it really underscores the importance he places on direct experience, on that tahqiq, that personal verification.
Hopefully this has given you, the learner, that quick but thorough insight we aim for, maybe spark some of those aha moments we mentioned. It's obvious, though, that this is just, dipping a toe in.
Oh, absolutely. Ibn Arabi's work is vast, an ocean. This is just a glimpse. There's so much more in his writings and the Sufi tradition generally for anyone interested in exploring further.
So, perhaps a final thought to leave you with, building on all this. Ibn Arabi emphasizes concentrated intention and how our working assumptions shape understanding. How might your own focus, your own perspectives right now be shaping how you perceive the spiritual side of reality? Something to mull over